Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second session we've got going in this room today. So just a little bit of technical jigging around here, but it should all work hopefully quite smoothly. So this morning we've got Holocaust Commemoration and Contestation online, and we have 4 presenters with us here today, and three in the room, 1 online, and we have a video from their 5th colleague who's unable to join us in person. We've got Dr. Sam Merrill, Associate Professor at Umio?
Maybe I should defer to Simon. Umio? I've been living there 10 years, but I still can't say it myself.
In the Department of Sociology, Centre for Digital Social Research, and is Principal Investigator of the Swedish Research Council funded project #Never Forget versus #Never Happened, Holocaust Commemoration and Contestation on social media. We also have Professor Simon Lindgren over here. He is a Professor of Sociology and Director at the Centre for Digital Research at the same university. Yeah. His research explores politics, power, resistance at the intersection of society and digital technology. He employs critical discourse approaches, computational text analysis and social network analysis to examine issues related to movements, mobilisation, opinions and identities. Online we have Dr. Eric Boyd, as a postdoc researcher on the Never Forget versus Never Happen project. He also works at the same university and in the same department. I'll say keep reading into that.
You can repeat it.
Yeah, I guess keep repeating it. He publishes on intersections of commemoration, resistance and critical heritage studies, and holds a PhD in social anthropology awarded by Durham University. We'll have a video from Tobias Hartmann, who's an Associate Professor for Visual Culture, Media and German Studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and is co-initiator of a TikTok Share Commemoration and Education Initiative, and partner in the project Share Stories, learning about Holocaust with short videos. He is also a member of the Never Forget versus Never Happened project, and partner in Horizon Europe project Memorize. There's been some other Memorize talks I believe you will probably know about this week. And finally we have Dr. Sophie, I'm going to get it wrong now.
That's fine. Yeah.
Who holds a PhD from Aarhus University, specialising in memory studies, affect theory, far-right populism in Germany, and her research explores the effective dimensions of collective memory and far-right narratives about the past. Currently, she engages in projects addressing extremism, memory politics, populism, anti-Semitism, and social media.
Cool. Great. Yeah, thanks for that introduction. Obviously, this project has been mentioned like 3 or 4 times already following our bios, but that's the purpose of this panel, right? It's a Swedish research-funded project that's been running since 2023, or run through 26 and probably a little bit through to 2027. And we're taking the kind of opportunity that's presented by the EXPO to share some of our ongoing research within that project. So the 4 papers that the team will present all sit under this project, and they're all at different kind of stages of kind of progress. So we're treating this as a very kind of works in progress kind of panel, and we're really looking forward to getting your feedback. So thanks for coming along. Just to act as an umbrella for these 4 papers, I thought I'd just say a few words on the overall kind of frame of the project. And basically, the aim of it is to analyse the contemporary commemoration and contestation of the Holocaust and its victims on social media, specifically during its major anniversaries and memorial days. And we're focusing on Swedish, English and German linguistic settings. And we're basically also looking at the social media use and content produced by institutional actors, but also grassroots commemorative actors, as well as kind of anti-Semitic actors, maybe far-right actors that are actively kind of contesting the memory of the Holocaust during these moments. Our research questions reflect these kind of focuses. So we've got the first overarching research question is how and around what topics and content and to what effect do institutional and grassroots actors interact on social media when commemorating the Holocaust during its anniversaries. The second is how are these efforts to commemorate the Holocaust on social media contested by anti-Semitic actors at these times, and what's the impact of such contestation and how can it be countered? It's a cluster of questions. And the final research question focuses more on the kind of technical design and algorithms of the social media platforms that we are analysing, and looks how these things play into these kind of dynamics of commemoration and contestation. And we've had an introduction to 5 members of the kind of project team, or those closely associated with the project, but there's a 6th, which is Vicky, who's obviously I really tried to get her to do a presentation today, but I think she's got something else on. I'm not sure exactly what, but she couldn't make it. But this is us, and you'll hear from all of us, and we're kind of working on a different kind of constellations of papers. On today, papers that you'll hear about will be about platforms including X, TikTok, Facebook, and perhaps a lesser known for those of you in the room, a Swedish online forum called Flashback. So in Swedish terms, it's a bit of a kind of, I couldn't resist, a kind of smorgasbord of stuff that you'll get an insight into. The project material, the data is English, German and Swedish language social media content, which is also text and image-based content. It's been collected both retrospectively and in real time and via digital ethnographic observations. And also, as the project progresses, we will also be carrying out semi-structured interviews with institutional and grassroots actors, and I'll come back to this in a moment. And the methodologies, just to give you a quick rundown that we're kind of using, involve large-scale computational analysis techniques for both image and text-based content, including things like topic modeling, which you'll hear a bit of today. We're then combining that with multimodal critical discourse analysis, and then we're triangulating that in turn with kind of interview and digital ethnographic material. So we kind of focus on a kind of thick descriptive or zoomable reading kind of approach, and we're also interested in kind of developing typologies. And overall, for the technical side, we have this kind of platform studies approach, which kind of holds us all in common. But I don't want to talk much more, and I want to hand over to the first speaker, which will be Eric, who will be presenting online. But just before I disappear a little bit into the background, we have a kind of call for participation. So we are looking for institutional actors to interview about their experiences of using social media to commemorate the Holocaust, specifically during its anniversaries, and how they respond to contestation in that time. So if you know anyone who would be interested in participating in that respect, please reach out to us. And otherwise, if you'd like to hear more about the project more generally and the panel, just send any one of us an email, and we'd be happy to give you more info. But with that, I think I'll hand over to Eric, and Ben will handle that switch. Thanks very much for joining us.
Great, thanks. I'll just share my slides. Let me know if they're coming up. Great, you can hear me and see slides?
Yes,
good?
that's great.
Okay, great. Well, thanks very much, Ben, for setting up. Thanks very much, Sam, for the introduction. I'm presenting today on a paper that Sam and I are putting together, the title of which is The Digital Multiplicity of Anniversaries, 7th of October 1944 and 7th of October 2023, and Holocaust Instrumentalization on Social Media. So, although having kind of published on critical heritage studies and memorialization myself, I joined this project in October 2024, and I'm new to Holocaust studies. In general, I think that's something that Sam and I both share. So we both kind of, in discussions, we were talking about, well, it might be best to try and get a handle on where memory studies is post October 7th, 2023. So that was our kind of lead-in into this paper. So this is just a little bit, this is just echoing what Sam had said about the project. What we're focusing on with this paper is very much organizational, institutional memorialization centers online, one in particular, and the comments and posts and reposts on the platform X primarily of these organizational actors by grassroots actors, and the direct interaction between these two on the platform X. And so our question leading into this In what ways was Holocaust memory commemorated and or contested in online interactions between a Holocaust memorial organisation and grassroots actors relating to the first anniversary of the October 7th, 2023 Hamas attack on Israel and the 80th anniversary of the Sonderkommando revolt of 1944? So we'll get into it a little bit more, but the Sonderkommando revolt of 1944, so the Sonderkommando revolt of 1944 was an act of resistance by Jewish Sonderkommando prisoners where they blew up a crematorium at Auschwitz II-Birkenau and put it out of action up to and through the camp's liberation. October the 7th, 2023, the Hamas attack, that was Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, and that was what triggered the ongoing conflict in the Middle East when Hamas actors, militants, stormed several kibbutz and the music festival. So the questions we're asking about what connections are made between these two dates, these anniversaries online, is what, if any, relationships are made between these dates and actions, and do commemoration and contestation intersect and overlap in meaningful ways? And what we'll get to by the end of this short presentation is the fact that commemoration is ubiquitous in terms of the commemoration of the Holocaust, commemoration of the Holocaust through the Sonderkommando uprising, the Sonderkommando revolt. But what we're also seeing is in that commemoration, we're seeing that being instrumentalized, so being used to talk about the Hamas attack of October 7th, 2023. So we're seeing very little distortion or denial of the Holocaust online in what we're looking at. But what we're seeing in ways of contestation is a contestation over who has legitimate claim to use the memory of the Sonderkommando. And that's what we're pointing towards with our analysis. As we said, this is a draft of a paper that we're writing, and we're very open to feedback, questions, comments in the room when the time comes. So, contestation, commemoration. This is just a brief rundown of the presentation. We'll go into a little bit more what the Sonderkommando was, what the anniversaries. The methodology has been mentioned. It's a digital ethnography, exploration of the Auschwitz Museum account primarily, the relationship between the grassroots actors and the posts by the Auschwitz Museum's X account. They're necessarily held in relation to each other because they are comments. It's as if having a conversation, rather than being a digital ethnography, sitting in the room, listening to a conversation, observing that. Conceptual framework we use is Rothberg's multi-directional memory. That's built into the methodology, built into the relationship between the X posts, and as a mode of analysis as well. And then when it comes to analysis, as I said, commemoration as instrumentalization, and contestation is in the legitimacy of the claims to the use of the memory of the Holocaust for moral judgment or to try and assert a kind of political complicity. Okay, so October 7th, 2023 and October 7th, 1944. So October 7th, 2023, we have Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, Hamas's coordinated attack on the kibbutz and the music festival, the Nova Music Festival, which resulted in the death of 1,200 people, Israeli Jews, diasporic Jews, non-Jews. There was the taking of over 240 hostages, and of course this attack triggered immense media coverage, global outrage, immediate condemnation by the international community. So what we also see, kind of as a coincidence, as a kind of temporal convergence, a date convergence. There are some conspiracy theories online, of course, about the significance of the overlapping dates. But on October 7th, 1944, 79 years before Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, we have the Jewish Sonderkommando prisoners' revolt at Auschwitz-Birkenau. So, for those unfamiliar, Sonderkommando were the Jewish prisoners forced to work in the disposal of the bodies, the pillaging of the bodies, and the preparation of people for placement into the gas chambers at Auschwitz-Birkenau. So they had quite an intimate relationship with the camp guards, which allowed them a bit more privacy and access to the bodies, which enabled their revolt and their uprising. So again, Sonderkommando, they were a planned resistance movement. This was a planned revolt. It had been months in the making, smuggling explosives from the slave labor that a local munitions factory was bringing in from prisoners from the female camp. They smuggled in gunpowder, and the Sonderkommando lined the walls of Crematoria 4 with the gunpowder. They were able to ignite that gunpowder, and then in doing so they killed a number of Nazi guards. In response to this act of revolt, hundreds of Jewish prisoners were executed, and the 4 female prisoners from the munitions factory were hung. Now this is seen and commemorated as an act of defiant resistance in the wake of overwhelming oppression, the genocidal actions, extermination actions of the Hitlerian regime in their final solution. This brings us into looking at this idea, the conversion of the anniversaries into this idea of multi-directional memory. So for those again unfamiliar, the position of multi-directional memory put forward by Rothberg in 2009, he reiterates again in a book in 2021, trying to kind of pin down the ethics on this multi-directional memory, that when things are commemorated especially, but held in a memory, no memory is kind of an island, right? Is that when you're in remembering one atrocity and the constituent parts of one atrocity, you're often sort of remembering or invoking or involving memories of other atrocities. So again, there is a relationship between memory as it is articulated as a form of working memory and as a way of commemoration, and especially as a kind of as a tool to invoke perhaps protections from the law or things like this. Now this has ethical risks, and it's quite ethically fraught in relation to the Holocaust, because I mean again, as we likely know in the room, the Holocaust is held as a separate entity that cannot be referenced in really any particularly meaningful way. Especially when it comes to kind of memory studies. And so this has been held up against multi-directional memory as delegitimizing the Holocaust as a singular apocalyptic event, and also as a tool of that creates the Holocaust as a tool that can be used sort of politically or morally. And in an application to digital Holocaust memory, especially what we're looking at here, the memory of the Sonderkommando revolt is not only observed when people commemorate it, but it's reactivated. It is reiterated. It is brought back into a contemporaneous environment and made relatable to contemporary events. So users engage in multi-directional memory work to support divergent moral or political positions, as we have seen it in the data. So you have this examination or this commemoration of the Sonderkommando revolt used in both pro-Palestinian and pro-Israel arguments, because they're both tapping into this to the narrative of resistance against oppression. So you see it, it's kind of it's kind of tapping into these accusations, arguments that we've seen of the Holocaust becoming a kind of floating signifier online. That it's such a big event that it can be kind of invoked to talk about any kind of horror and in a way kind of delegitimized. So yeah, as it's saying, Holocaust memory becomes a symbolic resource to demand moral accountability or to call for ceasefire or political action. Digital ethnography, application of ethnographic practices into digital network spaces. What I'd say here, to keep it brief, is that it was mainly observation of how commemoration was being committed online. It wasn't a particular focus on the quantitative aspect of it, but the fact that elements were there of commemoration as instrumentalization is key. Those are worth noting, and those are worth discussion. This is something that the curator of the Auschwitz Museum online post has talked about in interviews. The fact that that contestation, distortion, denial can be minimal, but it's often the most impactful when it comes to responses to posts by the Auschwitz Memorial. Methods and data. Field site selection was the Auschwitz Museum. That was because it's the most followed Holocaust memorial account on X with 1.4 million followers, and because it remains active on X. Now, there was a mass abandonment of X platforms after X got bought over by Elon Musk and was massively deregulated in terms of the content it could show. Then also after Elon Musk doing the Zig Heil after Trump was elected, you saw Jewish institutions stand back and say, okay, we don't really want to be on this platform anymore. Data collection, manually scraping, screenshotting comments and reposts, again focusing on users' responses that commemorated or contested Holocaust memory. Data sample, there were 7 posts referencing Sonderkommando Revolt between September 30th and October 22nd, 2024. 5 of these were posted on October 7th, 2024, which was the 80th anniversary of the revolt. So that's key here. October 7th, 2024, the date that we're looking at is the 80th anniversary of the Sonderkommando uprising and the first anniversary of the October 7th attack. So we're looking at how these two elements interact online, interact via the commemoration of the Holocaust made by the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial X account and the grassroots responses to that. So to put this in Auschwitz Museum in context, which we've done, it's probably easier just to kind of show this table here, where these are the top 5 institutions for Holocaust memory online, and their follower count and the number of impressions that they got from their activity on October 7th, 2024. The next biggest account you can see after Auschwitz II is the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and that has 40% of the followers that Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial has. Even though as well that their October the 7th, 2024 post was quite provocative in terms of a direct relationship between October 7th and the Holocaust. What we see with Auschwitz II Birkenau, their posts on the day, you can see it's the second post there in terms of number of impressions, but it's the first, it's the most number of impressions made on October 7th, on the day itself. So this post that got the most number of impressions, they held a commemoration for the Sonderkommando, observing the 80th anniversary of the Sonderkommando revolt, but they also used that same post to call for a, quote, end to the spiral of violence in the Middle East. Now this quote was a very measured, very practiced, kind of a very ambiguous call. It didn't say how they wanted the violence to end, they didn't say who they wanted to end the violence, they just wanted the violence to end. So a lot of this kind of absence of what was being directly spoken about, only kind of implied, was extrapolated on by the accounts that we saw that were contesting this memory, or commemorating this. And so that's the thing as well to note, is that what we saw primarily was that commemoration was ubiquitous. You know, there was, I think I came across in the data scrape, I came across one denial post and 1 or 2 distortion posts. But distortion we can get to, because that's more complex than denial in this instance. But what we see is that, you know, hundreds of comments, hundreds of reposts on the Auschwitz Memorial posts, Auschwitz Museum posts, and they're, you know, flower emojis, gifts of candles being lit in, emojis of candles, the Jewish cultural saying related to grief, which is may your memory be a blessing, commemoration across the board, which like that was, you know, on the surface of it plain commemoration. But what we see in the posts that start to talk about how the Sonderkommando relates to October 7th, 2023 and the Hamas attack is no distortion or denial of the Holocaust, what happened in the Holocaust, the Sonderkommando revolt. We see it commemorated, but we see that it commemorated as a form of instrumentalization, as a form of saying, look at how these oppressed people rose up against their oppressors who had genocidal intent and genocidal action. Look at how these people rose up they're an example of the human capacity for resistance in terribly oppressive times. And we saw those on both pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian accounts. So again, we're seeing that commemoration isn't, really being challenged here. Commemoration is in full swing. People are observing the horror and the meaning of the Holocaust and Sonderkommando Revolt. But in some of that commemoration, we're seeing it being instrumentalized. And where the contestation comes in is in over claims of who has legitimate use to invoke resistance. Who is the oppressor? Who is resisting whom? What is going, where does this memory have a more legitimate moral weight? And of course we saw it leading into the political side of things as well, in terms of the accusations of who is the oppressed, how violence needs to stop, things like that. So that is where we're at with this paper, with this analysis. I think I'm coming in on time, maybe. But yes, thanks very much. We're very open to questions and comments when the time comes.
Yeah, all right. Thank you for having me, first of all. I'm going to present a paper I'm working on with Sam at the moment. It's a work in progress, so very, very open for feedback and comments. But the general idea of the paper is to investigate how major German parties commemorated the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau on Facebook, and how this Holocaust memory is negotiated and contested by other users in comments that appear sort of in response to those commemorative posts. And as there's very little research focusing on the affective and emotional aspects of commemoration, we have a particular interest also in getting a sense of what kind of feelings and emotions are articulated and encouraged in course of these posts and in course of the comment threads that are sort of developed underneath them. Also, given that the anniversary of some of you might be aware of coincided pretty much perfectly with the 2025 federal election campaigning, we also wanted to shed light on how the interpretations of the past are applied to current political issues on conflicts in a particularly German context, so maybe in some way analogous to what Eric has just presented, where it's sort of, on Middle Eastern conflicts. We wanted to sort of focus that on the politicization in the German political context. And to do that, we have gathered our empirical material, which is mainly Facebook posts published by the Christian Democrats, the Social Democrats, the Green Party, the Left, the AfD, and also the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, sort of the new, I often call them left-wing extremist party, but I'm not sure if I agree with that, but sort of a new party. So basically, all parties who had like a realistic shot at being represented in the next Bundestag. So getting over the 5% hurdle. So we kept up the post and the respective comment sections, and we're currently in the middle of analyzing this empirical material, applying a mix of critical discourse analysis, affect analysis, and conversation analysis. But for this quite short presentation, I thought I would sort of skip the details about the theoretical and methodological background. I'm happy to discuss that in the Q&A if anyone's interested, but to dive straight into little snippets of the material to give you a concrete idea of our first insights into Holocaust commemoration and contestation on Facebook. No.
Do you want me to come and do it for you? No worries. Just let me know when you want the next.
Yeah, if you could skip to the... Yeah. So I'm going to start with a party from which we probably, most of us, would expect the least amount of commemoration and the most amount of contestation of sort of established Holocaust memory in the German context, the AfD. And the AfD faction in the German parliament posted this on 27th of January. This, most probably AI-generated image of a candle against the black background. And while this black background and the symbol of the burning candle in the dark conveys, I would say, a notion of solemn and quite serious mourning and remembrance, they also sort of created an image of a candle with the Star of David on the candle, which suggests implicitly that this gesture of grief is exclusively about remembering Jewish victims. And simultaneously, the text accompanying the post remains actually rather vague. It does not actually mention the Holocaust. Sorry, it might be a bit small, but I hope I sort of translated some key parts of the post. So it doesn't actually mention the Holocaust explicitly. It doesn't mention any other concrete NS crimes, German aggression, violence, and genocide explicitly, but it rather talks in very sort of generalizing terms about victims of war and tyranny, which could be, basically anything. There's no shortage of examples of war and tyranny in human history, unfortunately. So the post does not really actually confront audiences with the genocide committed by Germans, but rather the AfD calls for supposedly politically neutral memory and implicitly accuses others. So, we can assume it's political opponents, that they are of misusing the commemoration to agitate against the AfD, which sort of, they don't say explicitly, right? But if we know sort of the overall memory discourse and how memory is being used currently in Germany, sort of, that's the context that this is happening in, right? So in a way, we know what the AfD means when they are talking about the alleged misuse of political misuse of memory. And in addition, also very interesting, the post presents an alleged imported Muslim anti-Semitism as the biggest threat to Jewish life today in Germany. So the post actually distracts from historical German guilt and the continuities of Völkisch anti-Semitism, violence and exclusion of Jews today, and presents racialized others as the notorious prospective perpetrators who are literally carrying anti-Semitism into Germany today. And so I would argue through this post that is seemingly, on the surface of it, about mourning Jewish victims, at a second glance it actually offers German audiences a feeling of guilt relief and encourages feelings of rejection and aversion against political opponents on the one side, but also against Muslims on the other side. And against the backdrop of the ongoing election campaigns and debates on immigration, the AfD also instrumentalizes the anniversary to create support for their right-wing extremist politics and the rejection of the political opponents on the one side, and racialized others or religious minorities on the other. The next one. That's an example of the comment sections, just so you very quickly, see what it looks like, and I've translated like a little part of it. If you can go to the next one. So the comment thread that sort of, there was a lot of comments. There was like 270 comments or something under that, but that's sort of just a little example. And it shows very well that especially guilt relief that is sort of implicit in the original post seems to find resonance among other users. We can observe that the implicit distraction from Germans as perpetrators sort of escalates into rather explicit deflections and rejections of guilt in the comments. And here we see statements that completely dissociate contemporary Germans from Nazi Germany and express the feeling of being unrightfully held down, so to say, and shamed by Holocaust commemoration. And this is implied in one comment asserting that, well, I, as a German, don't have to walk with a bowed head anymore, and that guilt is being used as a moral pressure tool against Germany. And this sort of feeling of being held down by memory or somehow being held back and oppressed also implicitly implies a longing for being liberated from this allegedly unrightful burden, which shines through in several uses here, agreeing that we as Germans, don't owe anything to anyone anymore. And a small example here of comments and sub-comments here, I would also argue, shows that the AfD's post is triggering explicit rejections of guilt and contestation of Holocaust commemoration, and I would say also involves sort of implicit hints into anti-Semitic tropes. They get more explicit in some other sections of the comment threads. So first of all, it includes Holocaust relativization, for example, when one of the users equates German genocide and war crimes with other definitely atrocious genocidal colonial violence and war crimes committed by other nations. But in this context, I would say it's not really used to create empathy with other victims of genocidal violence, but rather to sort of distract and from Nazi German crimes. And additionally, there's the claim here that Germany has paid enough. And I think I would argue that can be read as sort of an implicit allusion to sort of the narrative element adjunct to the conspiracy theory that Jews have somehow, financially profited from the Holocaust or continue to financially profit from the Holocaust. So we see also sort of anti-Semitic tropes coming in here in the comment section. Yes. So as sort of maybe a contrast, selected one other post by the Social Democrats, who I would argue set somewhat a different commemorative focus. They commemorated Holocaust victims and clearly put the focus on Holocaust victims as sons and daughters, mothers and fathers, best friends, neighbors and grandfathers, and thus I would say try to sort of let them emerge as fellow human beings that you can somehow relate to in some way. So encouraging the present day audiences to connect with these victims, to relate to what kind of pain and grief the loss of their life might have meant for their loved ones, their family and friends. And I would argue that this remembrance, especially trying to encourage feelings of solidarity, affectedness and grief, and a strong commitment to remembering these victims, as is also made explicit in the accompanying text, stating that we empathize and we commemorate. And at the same time, the AfD, Freudian slip, the SPD clearly presents Germans as perpetrators, which I actually found quite surprising because you don't see it that often, and indeed murderers, by stressing that these people were murdered by Germans, right? So the lesson to be drawn from commemorating the Holocaust then is formulated also again in a quite strong and explicit call to action to fight fascism, and not only anti-Semitism, but indeed all forms of inhumanity, or Menschenfeindlichkeit, I think it's in there, which I found hard to translate into English, but something along the lines of inhumanity. And also here, so implicitly, memory becomes politicized. Implicitly, in this context of the elections, the message can be read as like a call to take a stance and not vote for the AfD, or indeed actively oppose the far-right AfD. Next, so obviously we also have comments under that post, and again, if you just want to click again, I mean, there's just an idea that these comments actually existed, and then I sort of made translations of some snippets of them. And what I found really interesting is that the first comment that is visible under the post, which is probably it has the most interactions, so it's probably been sort of algorithmically, elevated to be sort of the first thing you see when you see the post. Supports the SPD, first of all. It supports the fight, or expresses support for the fight against the far right and the commitment to commemorating the Holocaust. But what I find very interesting, and what is something we could see throughout the comments, actually, not only under SPD posts, but among different parties, is that it makes this interesting statement. On the one hand, it stresses the responsibility and that current Germans have for the past, but it clearly rejects the guilt. And I think this is interesting because it implies that even those who express a strong commitment to remembrance and commemoration, and those who position themselves against the AFD, seem to understand guilt as something individual that is tied to individual perpetrators. This is also expressed in this one comment relativizing the Holocaust as something, as a crime that some people on this earth committed 80 years ago. So again, detaching it from, like a German-specific dimension, or the claim that 99% of the perpetrators are dead. And I think this underlines that how guilt is constructed, even in these comments, as something that has been contained and limited, as something that is over, so to say, with the death of individual perpetrators. And this implicitly, I would say, rejects a concept of society-wide collective guilt for systematic and structural violence, for genocide and crimes that continue, to have echoes and implications and consequences also in the present still. And from an effective point of view, I would say that this constructions also avoids the somewhat uncomfortable, painful, and destabilizing self-critical confrontation with the national self as a guilty nation, and affords a morally more, I would say, desirable or comfortable feeling of responsibility, right? Which is, Notably also in the comment thread, there's one user that, is making a somewhat radical and questionable suggestion of how to confront collective guilt by continuing to push, to punish those who fail to punish the real perpetrators in the present. So I'm not sure if we need to, pee on the names of other people. But I found this sort of an interesting intervention that doesn't yield any other interactions. It didn't get any likes. It didn't get any sort of further discussion in the comments. So that was interesting as well. So like a suggestion to actually still confront the fact that, many perpetrators weren't actually appropriately punished. So if we don't really want to go on talking about that in the comment. And additionally, we can also see the somewhat absurd, but actually not uncommon, externalization of guilt through reference to Hitler's Austrian origins and constructing him as a migrant. Which is an interesting sort of, cognitive loop to do. So, like, implying that this would change anything about the crimes committed and largely supported by German society. And just as a little concluding remarks, so both the AfD and the SPD politicize Holocaust memory in the context of the ongoing election campaign to delegitimize the political opponent, and in case of the AfD, also sort of agitate against Muslim and Muslim immigrants. And in the comments, we can observe that the AfD posts triggered explicit rejections of remembering, implying that we as Germans today no longer need to be affected by the past, and that we have deserved to sort of break free from the plight of remembering. But also under the SPD posts, we find more implicit deflections of guilt and Holocaust relativization that I would argue avoid, to some degree, a continued self-critical, uncomfortable reflection and critique of past and present German society. And I think sort of the next step that we are trying to work on now with the paper is to identify a bit clearer sort of overarching patterns in the comments, and then look into some comment threads in detail to sort of approach some sort of understanding what's going on there. Yes. Thank you for your attention. And
In my presentation, I would like to explore a trend that has become especially apparent in Germany during the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz and International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Over the years, these commemorative anniversaries have become most ritualized, increasingly incorporating digital forms of remembrance such as hashtags and online campaigns alongside traditional ceremonies. Recently, however, we have witnessed a noticeable politicization of Holocaust remembrance, and in this talk, I will examine how this politicization unfolds and what role criticism of the instrumentalization and distortion of Holocaust history plays. My focus will be on the format of short videos shared on platforms like Instagram and TikTok. In recent years, memorial sites in Germany, as well as other organizations and individual creators, have increasingly turned to this medium to communicate in a multimodal way. These short videos often highlight lesser-known aspects of Holocaust history, emphasize personal stories and biographies, provide access to historical sites and collections, analyze historical documents, and educate the public on historical contexts and the work of memorial institutions. Short videos are particularly well suited for this purpose. Within about 60 seconds, they can present complex content in an accessible way by combining multiple narrative layers, images, sound, music, overlay text, and effects like green screen. Platforms such as TikTok also use recommendation algorithms to identify users' interests based on their behavior, enabling memorials and educators to reach audiences who might not actively seek out such content. Many accounts therefore rely on peer-to-peer communication by young creators and align their content with current trends and references from users' everyday lives, enhancing both relevance and visibility. The 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz in January 2025 differed significantly from previous commemorations. Since the early 2000s, remembrance of National Socialism and the Holocaust has become a central part of German commemorative culture, state-supported and taught in schools and educational programs. The focus increasingly shifted to universal values conveyed through personal stories and victim experiences. By the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, it seemed there was broad social consensus about the importance of Holocaust remembrance. That 75th anniversary, however, was shaped by the COVID-19 pandemic, which forced memorials to cancel events, shift to digital formats, and close sites to the public. During the pandemic, troubling social trends gained traction. Public health measures were compared to Nazi-era persecution in ways that trivialized the Holocaust. Vaccination campaigns were even linked to concentration camps and mass killings. These distortions foreshadowed a broader shift as support grew for populist and remembrance-critical political forces. The 80th anniversary came at a time of rising popularity for the far-right and revisionist party AfD. Holocaust Remembrance Day coincided almost exactly with the launch of the Bundestag election campaign. In the months leading up to it, German memorial sites faced increasing attacks not only from right-wing extremists, but also from critics of Israel, particularly after the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7, 2023, and the subsequent Gaza war. Cultural institutions hesitated to clearly distance themselves from anti-Israeli actions or from the inflammatory use of historical comparison. This political backdrop also included provocations from abroad. Just 2 days before Holocaust Remembrance Day, Elon Musk, speaking at the AfD party conference, criticized Germany's focus on past guilt and urged the country to move on. A few weeks later, at the Munich Security Conference, newly inaugurated US Vice President J.D. Vance visited the Dachau Memorial. In his speech at the Security Conference, he criticized how democratic institutions push back against anti-democratic forces and called for their inclusion in governments, shortly before meeting the AfD leader Alice Weidel. Faced with this political climate, memorials are increasingly incorporating current topics into their work. The Neuengamme Memorial launched the #GeradeYetzt, Right Now campaign for the 80th anniversary of the end of Nazism, emphasizing the importance of Holocaust remembrance for democracy amid rising threats. Their statement calls for solidarity, cooperation, increased visibility for memorials, and public awareness of current challenges. As part of the GeradeYetzt campaign, the Neuengamme Memorial published a TikTok video addressing the upcoming elections.
because you know in a moment they could all.
In typical TikTok fashion, the memorial's TikTok creator appears on screen, accompanied by the text POV. You work at a concentration camp memorial in Germany, telling stories about how a far right-wing party came to power, and suddenly these stories feel way too real again. While the video doesn't name the AfD, it clearly links historical events with current political developments. Despite being well crafted, the video drew only 3,000 views, possibly due to its atypical style and tone. The video reflects an educational strategy seen across many creators that teach about the Holocaust, connecting present-day issues to the past without falling into problematic analogies. For example, Susanne Siegert from the account Keine Erinnerungskultur, No Memory Culture, posted a video responding to the protest slogan "Voting AfD is so 1933." Using effects like green screen and overlay text, she explains to her 220,000 viewers why this comparison oversimplifies history and why protests must begin long before authoritarian powers seize control, as they did in January 1933. What role do current political issues play on social media accounts dedicated to Holocaust and Nazi persecution, and how are they embedded in educational content? A comparative analysis of 3 active TikTok accounts reveals striking differences. The individual creator, Susanne Siegert, publishes 17 times more political content than the Neuengamme Memorial account, the most followed memorial site account in Germany. Posts were considered political if they addressed current issues, responded to Holocaust denial and distortion, or discussed right-wing and anti-Semitic narratives beyond the Nazi era. Interestingly, the House of the Wannsee Conference account shares nearly twice as much political content as Siegert's. This is largely due to its focus. Many posts deal with anti-Semitism, especially in relation to a 2022 exhibition on post-war anti-Semitic incidents. These posts, often tied to the anniversaries of such attacks, reflect the site's educational philosophy, using history to critically engage with today's challenges, especially with current forms of anti-Semitism. Siegert's videos are broader in scope. In addition to topics like Nazi codes, she frequently addresses the AfD, Holocaust distortion, and right-wing extremism. Her emphasis on contestation aims to equip users not only with historical knowledge, but also with tools to recognize revisionist and political discourse online. By contrast, Neuengamme's few political posts tend to focus on far-right extremism and are framed from the memorial's institutional perspective, often highlighting incidents that occur in digital spaces. Many accounts use anniversaries as moments to inject political content and challenge Holocaust contestation. These dates help make historical references timely and relevant, particularly on social media. For instance, in a video marking Holocaust Remembrance Day in January 2023, Siegert critiques the hollow ritualization of Commemoration. Meanwhile, the Wannsee Memorial uses anniversaries to bring attention to lesser-known events, including those not related to the Holocaust but post-war German anti-Semitism, thereby adding multi-directional perspectives to Holocaust memory. Most political videos reviewed response to Holocaust denial or distortion by providing additional context. The creators aim to show how historical knowledge is vital for identifying both deliberate and unintentional denial tactics, reaffirming the importance of historical learning in today's world. Some videos directly respond to harmful content, for example, distorted or conspirational comments. Accounts like Wannsee-Konferenz and Keine Erinnerungskultur reply with videos offering historical and factual rebuttals and exposing disinformation tactics. A particularly impactful example comes from Siegert's response to an AfD video urging people to honor their grandparents. She responds by tracing her own grandfather's Nazi past, offering a tutorial on how others can conduct similar research online, effectively countering the AfD message while promoting historical responsibility and actively doing history. The most powerful form of contestation across these accounts is educational. All three use their platforms to explain right-wing codes and how extremists use meme-like content to spread Holocaust denial and distortion. By teaching how to recognize coded language, emojis, and abbreviations, these creators build digital literacy and empower users to counter hate speech and anti-Semitic narratives. Creators and memorials alike understand the digital context in which they operate. Hashtags help them connect with communities, increase discoverability, and signal participation in broader campaigns like Reclaim TikTok. Memorial sites use hashtags more frequently, while Ziegert often takes a more reflective or critical stance towards hashtag culture. Still, hashtags remain a key tool for expanding Holocaust education beyond historically engaged audiences. In conclusion, this small and selective sample suggests that individual creators engage with political topics more often than institutional memorial accounts. Memorials primarily respond to Holocaust contestation by offering historical content, reflecting their core mission. Depending on each institution's profile, political issues such as anti-Semitism or Holocaust distortion may be addressed through exhibitions or thematic series, which then feed also into their social media presence. However, educational creators often integrate historical teaching with strategies that build digital awareness and empower users. They position themselves as part of a digital community that actively resists distortion, misinformation, and forgetting by contesting Holocaust contestation. Thank you very much.
One step back, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can just use that.
Yeah. So this last presentation then is about a paper that I'm working also with Sam on. The title is Flashbacking the Holocaust. As Sam mentioned, it's based on a study of a Swedish discussion forum on the internet called Flashback. It's very much a work in progress. I think this presentation will mostly show you what types of methods we have, what types of data we have, what things we can do with it preliminarily, and then some questions maybe about where we might be going. So the research context then, I mean, it's obviously within the framework of this panel, analyzing the Holocaust on social media, how it's talked about. This focus on a Swedish forum. As Sam mentioned, Swedish is one of the languages we focus on in the project. Makes it stand out a bit. It's potentially from the standpoint of a slightly less researched Holocaust geography, and also the type of discussion forum that we study. I'll say some more about its characteristics. Can be an advantage, but also takes some critical reflection, I think. The forum as such, that's a screenshot of it, of the front page. It's an old school internet forum, sometimes a bit sloppily, I guess, referred to as a Swedish Reddit. It is a discussion forum that has actually 1.7 million registered users. And I think Sweden has 9 million population, and it's in the Swedish language. It has 85 million posts, And according to recent statistics, the yearly survey that is done by the Internet Foundation in Sweden, 1 in 5 Swedes used it in 2024. And this gives this forum, I mean, it's huge. Some people who research flashback use the argument that it's one of the biggest discussion forums in the world. It's a Swedish language forum. When you're embedded in Swedish culture, this forum has a bit of like a dual reputation, I would say. I mean, there's no real name policy, there's minimal moderation, you can't delete content, it's not algorithmic in any way, and it comes from some sort of libertarian free speech culture. It used to be actually a magazine in the late 80s when it didn't focus on discussion but on publishing on certain political topics. So the fact that it is prioritizing free speech makes, I would say, it known in Swedish culture for 2 main reasons. One reason is that it is far-right leaning, because it's a suitable home for discussions that can benefit from not being moderated. So racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, all types of discriminatory language and hate can go into this forum. And among these huge numbers of users, the large numbers of sub-forums, these are in Swedish, but this is just the top. This is computers and IT. There's an AI forum, that's an IT security one. There's one about Mac, there's one about Windows, then it goes on with drugs, benzodiazepines, cannabis, then it goes on with economy, and it goes further down, like with lots and lots of sub-forums, where politics is one, for example. So it's structured according to these sub-forums, which would be at this level, and you would have to imagine many, many more. And then the specific topics, let's say, within each sub-forum, and the threads as well. So it's known for that it can successfully, if we use that word, host these more extremist discussions. And secondly, it's known for gossip. I mean, if you see, I know in the UK, for example, the tabloids can be quite fast at posting the names of people that have been sentenced and so on, and which celebrity did this or that. In Sweden, newspapers can be quite restrictive about that, but then if you see like major TV personality caught for drunk driving, then lots of Swedes would have this as their first choice to go to when they wouldn't want to know who it is. So gossip, crime, those types of things also go in there, which means that lots of people are on flashback. 1 in 5 Swedes are on there to check something. Celebrity gossip, who in their neighborhood was sentenced for a particular crime and so on, but it's at the same time a home to quite extremist things. So it has a bit of a dual character. I mean, it's big, it's sort of both mainstream and underground at the same time. So the aim and research questions for this paper that we're working on, I'm not going to read out the aim, but we're actually trying to do a kind of large-scale analysis of what discourses of Holocaust contestation and commemoration, in keeping with this project's sort of 2 key concepts of contesting or commemorating the Holocaust, exist. So quite a descriptive question. When has it been discussed? And there we're looking for the potential connection to anniversaries, which is also key to the project. And what role, the anniversaries, what role do they play? In relation to commemoration and contestation. So then where we're at now, I'm sort of the data guy in the context of this project. I'm not a memory studies scholar, and I'm not a Holocaust studies scholar. I'm new to this, but I have for many, many years done internet research, social media research. So I'm working with Sam on these issues, and I'm no stranger to working with like contentious topics. But what we did together was to devise a set of search terms, where we have a set of general search terms. These were sent to me by Sam: Holocaust, Shoah, and Förintelsen, which is the Swedish word for the Holocaust. which literally means basically the annihilation. Then we added specific search terms. You see them all here, and they are all names of the largest camps and ghettos based on estimated numbers of inmates and murders. So these were our search terms, those together with those. Then the forum search function goes back to the 1st of January 2000. I think it might have existed for some time before, but if you search the forum, that's how far back it goes. So I think I did the data collection around the 25th of May to 2025. The most recent match to any of these search terms at that point of data collection was a couple of days back. And the first match was actually 5 months in to the first available year. So that was what was decided the date range. And we also had this strategy that we would collect all individual posts from any thread with titles containing one or more search terms. So if you have a discussion thread which says, was Auschwitz really a thing? Then we get all posts from that thread. Or if someone says, today, let's remember all the victims of the Holocaust, then we get all posts of that thread. Then we also get any post that features one or more search terms. So that means if you're in a discussion thread on something quite unrelated to the Holocaust, quite unrelated to these camps, and there's a post that happens to mention any of these words. Let's say it's a thread on, what goes on in Ukraine, and then someone uses the word Holocaust. It also goes in there. So that ended up with a data set of 124,000 posts, and this is where we're at. Some first steps, some initial analysis. I haven't moved beyond that, so this is what I'm going to talk about. We looked, for example, now to get a feel for the data set at the total posts per search term. So which of our search terms yielded the most results? We see that Flossenburg, the camp 78, the Swedish word for the Holocaust actually 53,000 hits, and Auschwitz about twice as many as the Holocaust. So yes, in many cases then, which is probably quite expected, Auschwitz as a concept gets to stand in place of the Holocaust. The part gets to represent the whole. But that was also obvious when we went looking for traces of anniversaries. This is sort of the posting activity over time, and we wanted to see, does it spike on anniversaries? There are some patterns. Sam felt that maybe the most clear patterns were in this window, so we zoomed in on that window and plotted out the names of the 5 most mentioned camps, and I guess the only trace we see is that sometimes there's more posting on the Auschwitz liberation anniversary, for some reason, especially in 2011. But we're looking for connections to anniversaries, not super clear in this forum, but some traces of it. One thing is that when we look at in which sub-forums things are discussed, 45% of the posts are in the sub-forum called revisionism, which is maybe a methodological strength that we have these vast discussions, but on the other hand, not all mainstream discussion forums have a sub-forum about revisionism. It sort of sets the agenda for what is to be discussed. So 45% of the activity we have sort of captured is in the revisionism sub-forum. In the humor forum, that's that one, film is that one, feminism is that one, and these are the top 10 by size then. So the second largest represented one is this red one, which is National Socialism, Fascism, and Nationalism. So, yeah, I'm going to get back to that. Then, as Sam mentioned, we have started to do a topic model. That's a computational method that some of you may know, some of you don't. For simplicity, let's just say you computationally find topically coherent parts of the discussion on the forum. So basically, you could say, in very rough terms, a qualitative thematic analysis done at scale by a computer. but that statement needs to be problematized a bit. We used a library for Python called BirdTopic, which is based on a large language model, which is open sourced, and we used a sort of step-by-step process ending up with 50 topics. And these 50 topics are 50 dots on this map where they are plotted in terms of how similar they are on 2 dimensions. And then we see that maybe even if there are 50 topics, there are about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 groups where they cluster together. So there we can see also some of the broader topics within which they are discussed. And we're presently now working with diving into these in some sort of back and forth qualitative, quantitative methodology. Looking, for example, then more at the role of particular users, at these divisions across subforums, and actually also looking for contestation and commemoration. This is part of Sam's qualitative work, where we at least wanted to show examples of posts that may be contesting, basically someone saying they're just gonna chill on Holocaust Memorial Day and read a good book, eat some food, devote some thoughts to Hitler on all the brave soldiers, blah, blah, blah. And then a quite horrible post, and then a more commemorative post. We're trying to look for these patterns, and these are sort of stereotypical examples of these. So final slide then, as we're moving ahead, I think these are questions for ourselves, but also maybe open questions like, what does the choice of this platform really mean for our study? Should we study it as an extremist platform? Should we study it as a mainstream platform? Or should we maybe also think a bit more about the fact that it has these dual existences where you can go there to look for one thing and then find quite extreme views? What are the problems and opportunities between this proportionality? What would happen if we studied only the revisionist forum? What would happen if we removed the revisionist forum and studied more how discussions of Holocaust occur in other places? More theoretically, philosophically, maybe what happens to anniversaries in the digital realm. We have internet researchers in sociology. Manuel Castells writes of timeless time. Time sort of disappears on the internet. Joshua Meyrowitz wrote this sociology classic in 1985 about no sense of place, which also refers to time. When we look at this linear scale of dates, are we looking in the right places for where these bursts of activity come? Maybe this non-result around the anniversaries also opens up the arena to look for other bursts that are not anniversaries but something else. Finally, of course, we're open to any ideas or suggestions or questions that are based on this as we continue. Yeah.
Thank you all for a fascinating talk.
Sorry for hiding your computer.
No, don't worry. I'll turn everything around so you can see what's going on. Do we have any questions? Yes.
Yeah, 2 actually, if I may. One goes to Eric, because perhaps I just didn't get it. I didn't quite understand how your sample for your study is created. So are you looking at specific actors, or are you looking for specific keywords to collect your sample? If you could elaborate on that, that would be lovely. And the second one goes to Sophie, especially after you just spoke about this reflection process on who is using the platform you're researching. I was wondering if you could reflect on why you chose Facebook and what kind of people are using Facebook. So at least in my experience, it's a forum right now used by a very specific group of people. So generally a bit older than those hanging around on TikTok and Instagram, for example, and at least from my point of view, a bit more conservative, cautiously spoken. And how does that perhaps change the expression of your paper and your main argument there?
Should I dive in first here?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Sure, yeah, no, thank you for this. This is a bit of a fallout from the last time I presented a draft of this paper, and it gave far too much of a time to the methodology. But basically, on the day itself, on October 7th, 2024, I was sitting across multiple different platforms, social media platforms, and I was just looking to see what hashtags were being used. How people were talking about the first anniversary of the October 7th, 2023 attack. That was the initial sort of, again, this sort of participant observation kind of idea, right? Very ethnographic, going into the field. What does the field look like? What's going on in the field? What's happening on the day itself? But it was the Auschwitz Museum Memorial account itself started posting about Sonderkommando. So that was like, oh, okay, so there's actually a very definite sort of anniversary link. We have the 80th anniversary of the Sonderkommando and the first anniversary of Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. So it's like, okay, well, we'll start looking for Sonderkommando on these different platforms. And again, X, it was the most prevalently used, but I should note as well that Sonderkommando is being massively used on Latin X because it's used to describe Latin American citizens who voted for Trump. So there's a huge wealth of Sonderkommando stuff that are being instrumentalized in the US, but that wasn't particularly how we were looking at it. We were looking to see how the anniversaries were linked or connected. So that's why we stuck with this notion of, well, we're looking at grassroots but grassroots in relationship to organizational actors. If we have we have the biggest organizational actor online discussing the Sonderkommando, let's see what the responses are to that. Let's mine that and go into that. And we set the 3-week period around October 7th, 2024, so we could go in to see, just kind of what the lead up to, if there was any lead up, if there was any posts around them which were mentioning Sonderkommando or October 7th, which we found that kind of October 7th is now sort of mentioned a lot, regardless of the posts that are being put up by Auschwitz Museum. But you see them necessarily increase on the date itself, and in response, again, this is one of the key elements to it, is in response to one of the 7 posts on the day that Auschwitz Museum did, where they mention a spiral of violence in the Middle East, but that's it. Users start to fill in the blanks, and they start to extrapolate on that post, and that's the point of interest, right? Again, going in digital ethnography, kind of a snowball sample, if you will. The hope was to kind of build on this to get sort of interviews in place as well. We've been unable to secure interviews for some folks behind the X profiles. That would have been really used to bolster the data that we have and the sampling that we have. There's still maybe a little hope of those interviews coming together, but we're kind of, we've sat with this paper for a few months, so we're wanting to put it together as we can. But I mean, does that answer your question? Is there anything more maybe you'd like for me to point out?
Yeah, that's quite all right. Thank you so much. No
worries. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think if I'm being honest, it was maybe mostly for practical reasons, because it was relatively easy to capture these threats, and also because they're very sort of for conversation analysis, it's pretty neat because they're already organized, right, as a conversation with answers to answers to, and I don't actually know how many sort of layers of you can answer to an answer to an answer, and also because all of the parties except for the Free Democrats, notably, actually posted something on that day, which wasn't the case on all other platforms, and I think it was also because I wanted to sort of capture all sort of the major parties, but I also I didn't want to include videos simply because they're very complex to analyze, because I already had all these comments, right? So in that sense also sort of limited to, of course they could also post videos on Facebook, but they don't do that much. I think Facebook is still mostly sort of image driven, and of course there's the possibility to do reels, but like, I don't find that much. But of course, I mean, you're right that there's like, you know, there's a boomer bias maybe in sort of the replies, and I sort of will need to sort of mention that it's very few 15-year-olds who are commenting on Facebook, right? But I also, another reason why I found it interesting is because you have these, I mean, like people just write, they must have a lot of time, you know, like, I mean, they're writing these very, very long replies, and that's in a sense quite interesting, whereas on Instagram, usually it's some emojis, or, I mean, sometimes it's a longer comment, right, but also, for the purpose of this, I found it actually quite interesting that some people just, go, I don't know if they copy paste it from somewhere or just put it under like different things, but like just these like very long monologues and some, I mean, like I'd say interesting connections that are being made to them. So in that way, I also found very rich, yet easy to handle because it's mostly textual. Yeah, because like images also add context.
Thank you.
I mean, we haven't got another session started for a while, so if there's any more questions, if you're happy, and if you want to, would you like?
Question for Simon. I was really struck by the number of duplicate posts, and I was wondering whether they were like almost like a technical glitch, like you post and then the second post appears immediately afterwards, or if they were like the user who copied and pasted the same response to someone else.
Yeah, okay.
And why, like if the latter, why the decision to delete them, and would it be useful to study them within that context rather than as a standalone piece of text, if that makes sense?
Yeah, okay. So the duplicates, maybe your question still stands, but just to make my thought clear, the duplicates have to do with the fact, right, that when we collect the individual posts where anyone is mentioning any of the key terms, and then we collect all the posts from any thread where the thread title contains any of the key terms, that would mean that some of the posts are in there twice.
Oh, okay.
But I think it's a really helpful comment because of the architecture of the platform as well.
Yeah.
Because it relies on...
Because, I mean, that's sort of the explanation, and it felt quite straightforward when we did it.
Yeah.
But of course it means that we have some more context around some of the posts.
And I think it kind of wipes out those kind of strategies of ready-made replies, which I think it was quite a big kind of just...
Yeah.
Really
because there is this quoting function on this platform as well, where you get repeated content, because you can basically highlight part of what someone has said, and then when you craft your own response, it moves in there. And it's not as clearly structured as a thread on X or something, which means that it's also basically a technical challenge a bit to separate what's repeated from someone else and what's your own. So, yeah. But I mean, we get some stuff in this big jumble of text that's maybe not super structured all the time.
Yeah, which makes
you just get like a big bag of talk about the Holocaust. Yeah.
So, anyone else like to ask something? Okay. I've just got a very quick question actually. You may not have got to this stage yet. What are your sort of policies on people's names, anonymization, that kind of thing? Because it's always I find a very interesting area with social media, because obviously it's all public in the first place, but then at what point, do we...
I think in social media research there is, I mean, you could go for complete anonymization and also never cite anything directly, and to have like a hard line on that. Or you could go into some strategy of like paraphrasing, say like one of the big political parties said something like that, or something like this. But I think personally the best approach generally is to do some sort of, there's a method a form of triaging, like you say, okay, is this a public person? Is this a social movement, like an NGO or something? Is it an individual? If it's a movement, is it an individual posting on behalf of the movement, or is it someone posting, or an individual within the movement posting with their own voice, or is it someone, and then you make these choices. Obviously, the more, let's say, contentious or loaded the topic is, the more consideration you need to have in all these steps. But I think for the project in general, we will sort of fall back on different of these strategies depending on the context, but ethics is of course a big thing. Yeah. But sometimes also this research can be about exposing actually big political actors that do horrible things.
Yeah.
So it's.
I might add that your starting point of it's public. We avoid that kind of starting point. Yeah. So I mean, one of our kind of, besides the general kind of good practice of internet researchers, is this article. I don't know how old it is now, but you know, which
from the Cardiff people.
Yeah, from the researchers in Cardiff that showed obviously that the recontextualization of this material does harm. But it different, as Simon was saying, we have different opportunities that are presented to us, partly also like language. So in translating, you protect to some degree because it's not direct quotation, it's not searchable. But the probably the paper out of all that you're seeing today where this is most problematic is the paper that Eric and I are working on. Because this is
such a small number.
It's English language. And it's very tight. So
Eric raised his hand.
Yeah. Okay. So you could take it.
Yeah, but it was just to bring up what Sam was saying, was that's something we encountered. There's a version of this paper somewhere where we've got direct quotes, you know, from the ex posts that we put out. And you know, we said, well, we can't have that. These people are readily identifiable. You can copy and paste these quotes. You can find the people that are making them. So it's something we're contending with as well in terms of being like, I mean, what's the role, you know, of us basically saying trust us? That's what was said, versus being able to present, you know, traceable sort of data in this, and also, you know, the role of screen grabs as well, right? Because people delete their accounts or restrict who can see their ex posts and things like that. I think something else to raise is maybe in this regard a little bit, but our colleague on the project, Vicky, she wrote a really interesting paper which is about people kind of not necessarily speaking to each other online, but speaking to an algorithm, and the role that the algorithm plays, so the role that these platforms play in positioning what is being written on them, but also how people may believe that they're interacting to a broader audience, but they're interacting almost solely with the algorithm in itself. And so it's kind of this notion of how public, because we're just assuming because we have access to these profiles because we go looking for them that other people do, but these are buried under people's feeds and algorithms and things, right? It's you have to go searching pointedly to find this kind of stuff as well, right? Or you have to have the algorithm spit it back out at you. So there is an element here of already sort of necessarily perhaps needing to be embedded in the sort of the Holocaust denial or distortion cultures from which these are being these case studies are coming from, versus actively dipping into that and in a way infecting your own algorithm as well, right?
Yeah. No, thank you. It's a fascinating project. I'm obviously looking forward to see how it all develops. I'm very lucky working with Vicky. I'm going to have a front row view of it all, so I will hear all about it. So, unless there's anything else, I think we'll just thank them all one more time. And
thank you for joining us.
Yes.